This week's episode is brought to you by Lord of the Flies and John Smith. Thank you, Lord of the Flies and John Smith. It's with the generous support of listeners just like you that helps keep our quantum reticulation oscillators tuned to metaspace frequencies that bilocate the morphic resonance from our microphones directly into capillaries surrounding the pineal gland that assist deep tissue moisturization, which helps reptilian repulsion fields maintain proper buoyancy. If you'd like to help increase your anti-reptilian buoyancy metric, or just hear the second half of this episode, please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you the second half of this episode, but all of our episodes, more than doubling the Whole Rabbit content at your fingertips. But that's not all. I'll send you at no extra cost a 5x5 vinyl sticker of our big bunny cover art and the secret keys to our Discord server, where listeners and creators of the show hatched their plans to create a sentient Tamagotchi capable of haunting the people who didn't fade it enough. If your reptilian repulsion fields are already slick to the touch and you simply enjoy the free show but still want to help out, please consider giving us a like, subscribe, or share on your social media platform of choice. In this week's episode, we discuss the vibratory nature of consciousness, brainwaves, holograms, and what it all has to do with quantum mechanics. We open discussion by explaining the underlying science behind binaural beats and electromagnetic brain stimulation, before jumping into quantum entanglement and the emergence of spacetime from the ADS-CFT correspondence that echoes the ancient wisdom of hermetic philosophy. In the extended episode, we go further down the quantum rabbit hole to discuss holograms, neural oscillation, Planck's constant, the spooky implications of the double-slit experiment, and how to click out of this reality and into one beyond using proper techniques in a game of double Dutch jump rope. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the show. About the physicist who was reading a great book on anti-gravity?
No, what about it?
He couldn't put it down. Why is quantum mechanics the original hipster?
Is no one else going to play into this? Because I will.
I'm trying to answer it. I don't know.
It described the universe before it was cool.
Oh.
Where does bad light end up?
In a good year?
In prism. What happens when electrons lose their energy? They get bored.
Come on.
Okay, that one was pretty good.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just tell you that the CIA has used psychic spies for over 30 years, and that out-of-body and near-death experiences are regular occurrences in times of stress and disaster. Nay, we tell you exactly how it might happen, with an unhinged barrage of psychopathic ranting from the intellectual boundaries of theoretical biophysics, in a way guaranteed to turn your gray matter between your temples into a chorizo omelet, because this week we're discussing quantum consciousness, vibrations, brainwaves, and of course, holograms. I'm your host, Hack Rabbit, otherwise known as Luke Madrid. I am joined this week by the saboteur of Soviet seers, Mari-sama.
I'm telling you, it's the communists.
The magnetic mind magician, Malachor 5.
Greetings, material entities.
And the teleological teleporter, Heka Astra.
Hello.
In the episode before last, we followed up our conversation about the secret CIA remote viewing program by looking at a document produced by Army Commander Wayne McDonnell for his superiors at Fort Meade. That's where they do the remote viewing stuff. And it was meant to assess the methods utilized by the Monroe Institute in teaching astral travel, remote viewing, and out-of-body experiences to its attendees in their residency program. Presumably, Wayne McDonnell wanted to share any methods the Monroe Institute was using with his superiors in the Army, and attempted to explain how they worked, using ideas from physics, quantum mechanics, and of course, a splash of crystal waving Kool-Aid. In this episode, while we're not necessarily focused on the Gateway Assessment document exclusively, we will be using it as a launch pad for discussing some of the concepts it invokes from the world of physics, quantum mechanics, and, well, what it has to do with consciousness itself. To begin, we turn our attention to binaural beats, a method of inducing altered states made famous by the Monroe Institute that listeners can experiment with themselves using a pair of headphones and just a quick visit to YouTube. As we discussed in the last episode, the University of Virginia did an independent study on the effects of binaural beats, the bread and butter of the Monroe Institute, to see if they actually worked. Astoundingly, they found binaural beats to be an adequate replacement for fentanyl in laboratory settings, but only on the condition that the headphones were of the electromagnetic variety. As we learned, the $80 Audio-Technica M30Xs that the Monroe Institute uses contain a pair of oscillating neodymium rare earth magnets. To the contrary, when the University of Virginia used headphones that only pumped the audio by itself, they failed to produce the mind-altering effects binaural beats are proven to help induce. As it turns out, humans have more than just one way to experience sound, and by extension, binaural beats. As you might expect, it has to do with vibration.
So binaural beats can be utilized even by people with profound deafness, meaning completely deaf. So how is that possible, and why is that important for underlying points that we're going to get at? Well, if we look at the normal run-of-the-mill processes of hearing first, we can see that your ear receives vibrations through the air. Those vibrations, known as sound waves, enter your ear canal, which vibrates your eardrum, which in turn vibrates the ossicles. The ossicles are three little bones known as the malleus, incus, and stapes. Those bones amplify the vibrations, which are then picked up by the cochlea, a snail-shaped, tubular, spiraling cavity filled with fluid which functions as your auditory sensory organ. It coils about 2.5 times around a kind of central pillar called the modiolus. Attached to the modiolus is a basilar membrane, which spans the whole length of the cochlea. Sitting on top of that membrane are hair cells. If this doesn't make sense, you can also just imagine a soft, fluid-filled snail body that's coiled around, and inside that snail are tiny hairs that ride the waves that ripple through the snail's body. As those vibrations move through the fluid in the cochlea, it creates a kind of rippling wave that causes the hairs to move up and down, which causes a chain reaction that results in electrical signals the auditory nerve picks up and carries to the brain's auditory cortex. Almost all cases of deafness have to do with lacking a functional inner ear, and this is why things like cochlear implants exist as hearing aid options for deafness, since the method that they utilize is a kind of bypassing of the damaged inner ear. These just send the signal directly to the auditory nerve.
Kind of like those machines that you put on your abs and they make your muscles vibrate, but for your ears.
Those also use electromagnetism. So the way that such an implant works is by using an electromagnetic device that's mounted just behind the ear to vibrate the bones directly. It's a more direct fashion that it functions by. And it does this by sending the vibrations through the bone to manually stimulate the auditory nerves. Doing this, the signal completely bypasses the eardrum, making it so that the sound is heard from inside the ear as opposed to from outside the ear, which is a lot like how you can hear the loud crunching sounds inside your head when you're ripping through a bowl of Captain Crunch. So this is because the vibration is actually going through your skull, and it's this manual vibratory stimulation of the auditory nerve through the skull that was the same principle used by Beethoven once upon a time. As you may know, famously, he chomped down on a bar that was connected to his piano to be able to hear the music that he was playing, even though he was deaf. To me, this is where it starts to get really interesting, though, because what's even more fun about this is that the Monroe Institute experimented with sending the vibrations through non-ear locations, and they found that it was effective from any location on the head. So this is like teeth, skull, eyes, but the most effective location was, of course, right behind the ear and with earplugs put inside the ear. The Institute also discovered that by using the carotid arteries on each side of the neck that they could also get the same effects, which I think is pretty cool. So the basic idea is that these vibrations travel through your skull and they still reach your auditory nerves, creating signals sent to your auditory cortex. Your eardrums move one-dimensionally. The auditory cortex's job is to take the incoming input from each eardrum on each side and compare them. And that's what gives depth to the auditory objects based on the comparative differences. Given this information, it then creates a holistic auditory picture known as binaural fusion. The converged input from both ears is then transferred onto single neurons in the brainstem, and this chain reaction process is what makes it possible for the observable variations in binaural beats to become apparent and pronounced in the first place.
So what you're saying is a proper binaural beat makes advantage of the situation between your ears that helps you determine the depth or the range or the distance of a certain sound.
Yeah, this is kind of like biohacking in a way. So sound travels better in water than in air, and our bodies are largely made of water, making us capable of really getting into the heavy bass at music festivals as we feel it vibrate through our bodies. Our eardrums and cochlea are also filled with fluid, which is why the vibrations travel well through them as mediums. Sound travels faster and clearer in water than air because it's more dense than air. So normally, our range for hearing is capped between about 20 to 20,000 hertz, which is known as the audible range. It doesn't mean that frequencies outside that range don't enter our ears at all. It just means that our ears are only capable of processing within that range. Something that's kind of fun is that when we're underwater, we're actually hearing with our bones, since there's no air to carry the vibrations. This hearing with our bones underwater can actually allow us to hear vibrations in the ultrasound range, up to around 200,000 hertz above human hearing, which we wouldn't normally hear, of course. Since vibrations travel through water better than air because of water's density, it also makes sense that vibrations travel better through solid matter than through water for the exact same reasons. The denser the matter, the faster the vibrations travel. And that makes bone an even better conductor for sound than either water or air. And this just makes me think of the saying, I feel it in my bones, when you feel something clearly and deeply.
This is why you can hear a train coming if you push your head down on the tracks and have your ear right up to it, because the sound is able to transfer better through the metal rails than it is through the air. But I don't suggest putting your head on train tracks for numerous reasons. Not unless you're trying to take a really good selfie.
Don't do anything dangerous or illegal.
Ever.
So all this to do with vibrations traveling better through denser matter. It's a big reason why bone conduction headphones offer that clearer and deeper body of sound than air conduction headphones do. For us mammals, bone density serves as the best conductor for the vibrations to be carried through to the nerves, where those vibrations are then felt as impulses. And this is the biggest difference between air conduction headphones and bone conduction headphones. It's also why we can still hear underwater, and it explains why even deaf people can experience binaural beats. The nerves and auditory cortex still function even with the main channel of the ear being bypassed. So you can put a different hertz output on either side. As long as those vibrations are picked up by our biological hardware, we will still hear the hertz difference between the two inputs as being a unified beat. The one outlier to this would be people who are congenitally deaf, that's being born deaf, which I think is also really interesting because that means that they have no somatic memory of sound to draw upon, which I think that's really interesting personally.
You know, we really do live in a massive concert of exploding stars, cars driving down the street, your bodily functions making little squishy noises inside you when you're hungry or whatever. Like, just putting all that into account, if we're doing magic, just for a moment, consider that realm of existence being all around you. It helps me activate my senses and heighten them and be more sensitive to the environment when I remember that my body's very sensitive, you know, and like I can hear through my bones. And when you start reaching out into the world, you hear different things and you learn through experience. And I feel like that's a lot of what life is about.
I have a new theory on inertia, but it doesn't seem to be gaining any momentum.
So electrostatic headphones function by fast alterations of electrical charges to move a diaphragm. The movement of the diaphragm produces the vibrations that we hear as the audio output, the little puffs of air. On the other hand, audio technology like electromagnetic headphones and bone conduction hearing aids, they use electromagnetic pulses to produce vibrations. So this is different from electrostatically produced audio because it uses magnets to move the diaphragm instead. So to be clear, electrostatic headphones do not use magnets in their design. And this seems to be important to note, as Luke pointed out, since it seems as though electromagnetic technology is actually necessary to produce binaural beats in the first place, given the study of the University of Virginia. But why is that? So electromagnetic headphones use the magnetic field of a neodymium magnet combined with electrical pulses to produce oscillations. The pulsing of those oscillations produced will then move a cone to make the sound waves. Each frequency of oscillation can be measured as a hertz. Hertz is just a unit of measurement for waves per second, and it doesn't just apply to audio. Any wave can be measured with hertz, including electromagnetic waves. So why is this important? The electrochemical energy of our brains is expressed as electromagnetic waves by each of our neurons. We have about 100 billion neurons that are all firing off about 5 to 50 times per second. This happens in clusters, making noticeable peaks and troughs of activity. The frequency of that activity is what we commonly know as brainwaves. So brainwaves are those measurements of the peaks and troughs of neural firings, which make the electromagnetic neural oscillation clusters of activity that we can measure as hertz.
It's a little bit like if you've worked in any store ever, you notice that customers come in all at once and then it's dead. And then they come in all at once and it's dead. That's like brainwaves.
Yeah, when you get these measurements in hertz, it's not just as basic as you might think it is. It's kind of like there's some democratic activity going on with the neurons, and you're getting like overall activity ratings, basically, of what's going on at the same time, with the loudest of the activity, so to speak, being the highest of the peak.
I was studying frequency in my physics class. Now my brain hurts.
So can you explain what you just said a little bit more? Because it's
Yeah.
you're saying brainwaves are electromagnetic.
Fuck. I just spoke with Otacon. He's going to help me explain this. Now, to clarify, and this is something we talked about quite a bit before the show, electromagnetic frequencies range from radio up into gamma, and typically, even the slowest band of frequency, radio, is hundreds of millions of times per second. For instance, an MRI machine operates around 400 million hertz and is considered a radio wave. Visible light starts around 400 trillion and ranges to 750 trillion hertz. This is considered a very narrow band on the electromagnetic spectrum. Meanwhile, the frequency range of audio that humans can detect is far slower. It ranges between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. Likewise, brainwaves are even slower, between 4 hertz and 30 hertz. So when we're discussing electromagnetic stimulation of the brain, the hertz range of the electromagnetic radiation produced by a pair of Audio-Technica headphones is probably somewhere in the radio range, as anything higher would be dangerous. For instance, cell phones nudge close to microwaves, so you can cook your brain just a little bit if you talk on it long enough. And while there are such things as ultra-low frequency and very low frequency waves on the electromagnetic spectrum, they tend to be limited to being produced by natural phenomena like lightning and earthquakes, and the devices needed to produce them by humans need to be enormous in size. According to Wikipedia, a few nations have built military ELF transmitters to transmit signals to their submerged submarines, as opposed to their unsubmerged submarines, consisting of huge grounded wire antennas. Ground dipoles. They're between 9 and 37 miles long, and they're driven by transmitters producing megawatts of power. Likewise, it's safe to assume Audio-Technica headphones are not capable of producing EMF in such low frequencies. This is because electromagnetic radiation and sound waves are two entirely different types of waves. But how so? Electromagnetic waves are standing waves. They propagate through space in a vacuum, like how the waves do in an ocean. They go up and they go down, and depending on their frequency, it's directly tied to their wavelength. So that's why the very low frequency waves are super big, why you need such a big antenna to use them. And as a form of radio wave, just like normal radios, those gigantic waves are able to bend and go around and through buildings. Whereas like high frequency electromagnetic waves are really tiny and can penetrate your cells and hit your DNA.
Interesting.
Whereas like a radio wave is just too freaking big. Now, sound waves are more like audience members at a live concert. You know, rock and roll, hip hop, doesn't matter. You got a bunch of people in a room, and when they all push from the back, the people in front end up getting pushed too, and vice versa, and they kind of push into each other, and that's how sound works. As Hecka explained, the denser the medium, the faster it travels. The more people you stick into an arena, you can just push one and they all move. Same thing. The important thing here to remember is that these radio waves produced by the Audio-Technica electromagnetic headphones, they are strobed on and off in the hertz range closer to brainwaves and audio waves.
So basically, while they have an electromagnetic hertz that's very, very high, the hertz that they are being strobed on and off at is the hertz that's being focused on.
Yes. And that's more like a normal range that we can talk about between 1 and 20,000. Anyone who's ever made dubstep on an oscillator will know what I'm talking about, because you have the frequency of the wave itself, and then you can gate it off and on kind of thing.
Wow, 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 wow.
Well, a lot of that wobble and other effects actually utilize LFO, which is lower than our ability to hear it, which is what makes that wobble sound in the first place, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's like interference, right?
Yeah.
So to sum this up, the Audio-Technica headphones that are used to produce the binaural beats, they probably do emit a radio frequency around 400 million hertz, but this 400 million hertz is turned off and on in a range between 1 and 20,000 hertz.
So that's in the range of your brain waves,
Yes.
because it's from 1 to, yeah, okay.
And it's in the range that you can actually hear, something that translates to music. That's how they make the music. So we're not hearing the hertz range of the electromagnetic radiation itself, but the frequency at which it's turned on and off. This exact same measurement is applicable to a brain in an EEG. The electromagnetic field spikes and dips due to the action potential of the nerves in our brain, which are much slower. So these spikes and dips in activity, they correspond to the frequency ranges that we associate with neural oscillation or brain waves. The tendency for brain waves to mimic the wave frequency of external stimulus is known as FFR, or the frequency following response. And it can be used to entrain, so to speak, the brain to different levels of activity. So as it was stated with binaural beats, the idea is to create a kind of beat inside the brain, defined by the hertz difference between the two frequencies being played in each ear. This is how FFR is utilized to change brain waves. The induced beat acts as a kind of metronome to tell your brain what BPM it should acknowledge.
If sound can't travel in a vacuum, why are vacuums so noisy?
So regardless of how you might choose to listen to binaural beats, whether it's actually with some music to keep it interesting, or if you want to just get the beats, even without audible music or tones playing through the headphones, the electromagnetic pulses that are used to vibrate the diaphragm, they do still have a magnetic field that's penetrating your skull a little bit and stimulating some neurons therein with every little electrical pulse.
Like tiny elves with tiny kettle prods.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm not really going to explain why or how this is considered to be safe. It's kind of just like Bluetooth and radio, but it is safe, and it's not really something you need to start freaking out about. I don't want to cause a panic with anybody being like, oh no, electromagnetic fields, I'm just bringing this up because the penetrative nature of electromagnetic fields is what I personally find really interesting, and a larger version of the same tech is actually used in a medical treatment for major depression, OCD, and sometimes even tinnitus, which is the phantom ringing noise in your ear that you might get.
So those are like little tiny elves wearing lab coats with fancy cattle prods.
It's also known that a lot of people who have deafness or are hard of hearing have problems with tinnitus. It's not just something that people with good hearing have. A lot of deaf people actually have a lot of issues with tinnitus. This medical treatment that I'm referring to is actually called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. This treatment requires an electric pulse generator that's connected to a magnetic coil, much like the ones in headphones, but bigger. And by switching the electric current on and off, it creates a varying magnetic field that is highly concentrated. The magnetic coil is placed against the skull of the patient at a targeted location, and a specific on-off pulse or series of repeated pulses are used to stimulate the electrical activity of neurons. And this is generally done in ranges from 1 hertz to 15 hertz, depending. So for example, they might use 11 hertz for 5.36 seconds with 60 pulses. The magnetic field reaches about 2 to 5 centimeters into the brain and produces small electrical currents which activate the neurons in the targeted location, although deeper stimulation to 6 centimeters can also be achieved with larger coils. In the case of treating tinnitus, the TMS device is placed over the auditory cortex of the brain.
Well, all this talk of coils and this wacky brain zapping technology might sound scary. It reminds me of how much, Edison was going after Tesla and all his tech and claiming that all his devices were like tapping into dangerous, fields of work. Today, we understand now that Tesla was like actually kind of a genius, and a lot of this kind of stuff stuff might have been around a lot sooner if they let him do his thing.
That first guy you mentioned,
Thomas Edison.
that's the one who electrocuted the elephant, right?
Yeah, to show the destructive power of like alternating current. I saw that for the first time in Assassin's Creed.
So obviously the size of the magnets in headphones are much smaller than those that are found in TMS or MRI equipment, but the magnets used do still produce a magnetic field regardless. The kind of magnets that are typically used in headphones are neodymium magnets, as we've stated before, and they're chosen specifically for their high magnetic field because it makes for good frequency response in small dimensions. So in other words, neodymium is used because you get more bang for your buck on a small scale. While the magnetic fields from headphones don't penetrate as deep as a TMS machine, they do still cause stimulation to what is within the magnetic field. So you might think of this as being more like EMP microdosing that causes a bit of additional neural stimulation as you use them. Some companies like Halo Neuroscience have caught on to the overlapping therapeutic effects of TMS and electromagnetic headphones, and they've started marketing their own electromagnetic transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS headphones.
While some of this might sound like weird science or crystal waving at first, the fact remains that according to quantum mechanics, everything is, at its most fundamental level, nothing but interconnected waves of energy, just like your brain.
And there's like a big discussion in quantum mechanics and what it means for consciousness, you know, because it's been about 100 years since quantum mechanics has been presented in the scientific field and people taking it seriously. And underlying all that were like thoughts of like, what does this, you know, unifying theory mean for human consciousness? And, you know, this is a somewhat of a part two to a past episode in the past, like we've said before. So I'm just going to sum up some of the things I said in that past episode because I did intend on having them kind of together because it makes a lot more sense, at least to me. So quantum mechanics is the current standard model of physics. It's kind of what they're assuming is the truth, at least at this time.
It's part of the standard model.
Right. It's telling us that at the fundamental level of reality, it's not all material, but rather based on waves or these wave functions. It's all electromagnetic. In these waves, particles can communicate instantly. I explained that in the past episode. And if that's true, it would mean that this is a non-local reality. You know, that instantaneous interaction breaks the rules of classical physics. It's not supposed to happen that way. But in a non-local reality, distance are merely measurements within a singular entity. Now, my interpretation of this, applying it to consciousness and magic, the goal is to kind of become one with the universe, right? To become a singular quantum level entity within the dimension, and the other dimensions that exist, you know, you become one with them somehow, and that's how you travel between them. You find some route and some connection between them, and you can go through that path. You know, these distances would no longer exist as a dividing factor. It's merely a measurement within one multiversal entity, perhaps. And I explained all that stuff in the very end section of the episode 2 weeks ago. So moving forward now, everything is energy. And there's a great quote by Max Planck, one of the godfathers of quantum mechanics, that I feel works as a bridge between the worlds of science and magic. And he said,
"As a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about the atoms this much. There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter."
a little spooky. He sounds like he's talking about a god.
Yeah, we don't talk about God in physics, buddy. Just keep it to yourself.
That's all he can find, right? That's all he can reason with.
I really like how he's also not the only one who have come to this conclusion. Regardless of field, there's a lot of astrophysicists or quantum physicists that end up coming to this conclusion that there's just something more, and something that's a bit on the spiritual side is pretty interesting.
To segue for a second, Charles Darwin's second edition of his Origin of Species includes all of his commentaries. It's actually the full version of the book because he talks about God. He knew that the first edition, he wanted it to be presented as a scientific document, to be taken seriously. And in his second edition, he made sure to tell people that he believed in God. And he explains some of the things he brings up in a scientific way through his faith.
This is one of the reasons why I personally always come back to a different quote from Carl Sagan. That's the notion that science and spirituality are somehow mutually exclusive does a disservice to both.
It's true.
It's a lot of people way smarter than me have come to that conclusion.
Right. So in many ways, putting all this together will smash the conception of what matter and thus atoms really are for people who haven't looked at this stuff critically like we're trying to in this episode. There is no matter as such, like he said. And he said this about 100 years ago. What this means is atoms are not made up of tiny, quote unquote, solid balls of matter rotating around each other. Classical as it may be, this is an antiquated idea which, according to quantum mechanics, is fundamentally incorrect.
At its most basic level, everything in the universe is vibrations of energy. Speaking of which, a Higgs boson walks into a church. The priest says, "You can't come in here. We don't allow Higgs bosons." The Higgs boson says, "But without me, how can you have mass?"
And it seems like magicians and occultists have studied these ideas for thousands of years now. They just haven't, or they didn't at the time, have the worldly vocabulary that we use today to explain it to just any person or even the run-of-the-mill scientists today. The language of the magician is highly symbolic and as such is naturally occulted, understood only by the few. But now in the modern era, science has provided us a sort of vocabulary, a lexicon of sorts, to describe perhaps this level of reality within quantum physics. Same thing that magicians of old were talking about.
So to summarize, everything in the universe is made of atoms. Quantum physics deals with how atoms work, which of course has a lot to do with things smaller than atoms, otherwise known as subatomic particles and their physics. If you want to know how something works, you have to look at the smaller components that it's made of and how those work. The fun part about this is that things get pretty wacky once you start going to those smaller and smaller microscopic scales. Breaking it down, the center of an atom is called a nucleus, and it's made up of protons and neutrons. Protons have a positive electrical charge, and neutrons are neutral, meaning they have no charge. Around that nucleus, electrons with a negative charge fly around. This is the basic relationship which constitutes a single atom. The actual nucleus makes up less than 0.1% of the total volume of the atom, yet it typically contains more than 99.9% of its mass. Everything is made of atoms, which are in a constant state of motion. The speed of that motion determines whether it appears as a solid, liquid, or gas. So to simplify all of this, on their own, atoms are mostly empty space, but they're really good at keeping other atoms out of their space. And this is because of those electrons that surround their nucleus like little clouds. This is essentially why, even though atoms are mostly empty space that's vibrating, solid matter appears solid and incapable of passing through other matter. Going even smaller, the nucleus of each atom is held together by a fundamental nuclear force called the strong force. The strong force is what holds together the quarks of subatomic particles. Quarks are understood to be the basic building blocks of those protons and neutrons. Any of these subatomic particles with two or more quarks is called a hadron. So, for example, since a proton is made up of 3 quarks, 2 positive, 1 negative, a proton is classified as a hadron.
A cork doesn't walk into a bar and orders a drink from the bar. A neutron walks into a bar and asks, "How much for a whiskey?" The bartender smiles and says, "For you, no charge."
To sum it up again, according to Max Planck, quantum physics suggests we live in a universal energy matrix, one he likens to a vast, all-encompassing mind. This makes sense if we think about how our own bodies are made of atoms, and further discovery about how the atoms function should lead us to understand how or why our conscious minds function. And if the whole of reality is also made up of atoms, then it might be possible that the universe has a conscious mind as well. It's just different from the consciousness that is concerned with our body. It's not exactly the same because it's a giant universe we're talking about here. So I don't think it's going to have the same type of experiences that I am having. And one of the main features of quantum mechanics is the appropriately named theory of quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement specifically describes that certain things that have been linked in the physical remain linked or entangled instantaneously, mimicking each other, even if they are separated by vast physical distances.
So quantum entanglement is the term used to describe how 2 subatomic particles can be intimately linked to each other regardless of their physical distance from each other, even if that distance is a separation of hundreds of millions of light years in space. Regardless of that distance of separation, changing one actually induces an instantaneous change in the other. Einstein's famous E=mc² shows that energy and mass are equivalent and interchangeable. Energy can become mass, and mass can become energy. But no matter what, the expressions thereof are only operable within the universal speed limit. That's the speed of light. The really interesting thing about quantum entanglement is that it appears as though it does not care much for speed limits. It likes to break the law. And this, in a nutshell, is why quantum mechanics doesn't play so well with classical physics. So just as an example of quantum entanglement, you could take a light source that emits 2 photons at a time. This pair of photons will always have matching polarizations, no matter how far they become separated. Einstein famously referred to this as being spooky action at a distance.
He didn't like it. He didn't like any of this quantum stuff. It was completely at odds with what he was endeavoring to tell us about classical physics, and this is a classic Einsteinism where he's like, God doesn't play with dice.
So the way that these photons are entangled is kind of like this. Let's pretend these photons are just blank pieces of paper that Mari has sent in 2 different directions. She sent one to Luke and one to me. Luke receives his paper in California, rolls some dice, and writes the number on the paper. I do the same thing with my paper over in Canada. No matter how many times we repeat this experiment, where we go, or how many new pieces of paper and rolls of the dice, the numbers will always match, even with the random rolling of the dice. The dice themselves in this example are actually a part of the mechanics of quantum entanglement itself, meaning that it doesn't work if you're trying to control it by writing your name or scribbling on the paper. You have to roll the quantum dice, so to speak. You can observe it, but you can't control the quantum dice. This is why quantum entanglement is considered to be unexploitable for faster than light travel for communications, at least in a tangible or measurable way.
Which really sucks. I actually learned this caveat about the dice while researching for the episode. If you force a phase state upon an entangled pair, they stop being entangled. So if you look it up online, there's a bunch of articles that are like, well, you actually can't use it for faster than light communication because the result is always random, and if you make it not random, then, well, it doesn't work anymore. Sucks. It really sucks.
It sucks because it might be evidence that the capability to mentally break the rules isn't possible, but we have yet to come to that conclusion, because our tools apparently can't achieve this. But on a consciousness level and just pure binary information of what is facts in the universe, like, how do you quantify that? And that's why we're trying to figure out a unified theory, I guess. We have to explain every single thing in a scientific manner, including our consciousness.
I feel like it makes a little sense. Like, if you want the best tarot reading, you gotta choose them randomly. You can't just be like digging through and be like, ha, that's my fortune.
That's actually kind of funny to think about.
I mean, tarot is definitely a quantum experiment, and you're like giving certain values to each of the cards, but that's a different discussion.
Every time you look at one of those cards, the quantum waveform collapses into the card you're looking at, and then you're screwed.
No!
Now, I may not be using the term quantum entanglement correctly in regards to my explanation of what McDonald is talking about in certain sections of this document, because he's saying that you can instantly transmit mental messages or, see things on other planets and have that information now, like in an Einsteinian world, that's not possible. But McDonald is saying it's true. What it sounds like he's saying, since I'm almost saying this in verbatim to what he's talking about, but these are my words. Before the Big Bang, all matter, space and time is thought to have existed condensed in one singular, infinitely small point. Taking that into account, nothing would be totally separate. What this means is that the atoms which compose the neurons that communicate and ultimately generate thoughts in your brain as you hear the show are linked to the particles found in a star and its system trillions of light years away. This fact of our reality and our existence reminds me of what Nuit said in Liber Legis, or the Book of the Law, chapter 1, line 3.
Every man and woman is a star. I was going to say, we are all made of stars, like the Moby song.
Nobody listen to techno, no, let's go. Nobody listen to tech.
Or as the brilliant-minded Carl Sagan once said, we are made of star stuff. And that's quite literal, since the matter our physical bodies are made out of, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, etc., originated over 4.5 billion years ago from previous generations of stars. So I think it's really cool that you can basically trace your lineage back to the Big Bang.
That really can't be understated. If you look out there in the universe, 75% of it is just boring hydrogen. And then like 24.999% is helium. And then that remaining like itty bitsy bit of a decimal point left over, that's all the stuff you and me are made of. And that was all created using fusion inside of a star, like big nuclear reactions. What did the physicists have for lunch?
What?
Fish and chips?
Oh, come on, dude.
So I'm saying, granted that every one of us humans is made up of stellar matter, perhaps we too are, quote unquote, entangled to everything else in existence. I jump to the conclusion that it can be said that a change within oneself can and does result in a change in the exterior reality. There's limits to that because we all exist here together. It takes all of us to change our reality at bigger and bigger scales. So when Max Planck says mind is the matrix of all matter, what does that mean? What is this mind? It seems like it is at that same mass mind level that if we all of us humans were doing the same thing at the same mental wavelength, like it would happen, right? Like maybe this absolute mind of the matrix of all matter is that idea. It's just every single mind that can exist is existing in one thing, and that's why it's able to create our reality. It's one for one. Each mind that exists in our world, it has it within its singular entity outside of our world.
Well, we have found that there's a connective fabric between clusters of solar systems and even galaxies themselves. The galaxies are all connected by this invisible filament, which we have, according to our simulations and models, it looks like neurons. Like if you zoom out far enough, all of space just looks like the neuronal structure of the human brain or really anything else.
Yes, and the filaments feed energy and matter through from one galaxy to another. It's like the communication network between these different clusters of stars in a galaxy. So in a way, that is the way that the universe communicates and perhaps experiences itself consciously, but this is on a massive level compared to us.
So when we start talking about the absolute later in the episode, put this level of a mind in that word, absolute.
But even each individual mind has a microscopic cascading effect, goes all the way down into the subatomic, into the smallest parts of the universe. And we may also be basically made in the image of this higher mind. And I think what Planck was trying to say is the mind is a matrix of all matter, is that he was trying to communicate that consciousness is the fundamental substrate in which reality creates itself out of. And you can't separate it.
It sounds like as above, so below to me.
Or like an emergent universe?
Exactly.
Sure.
All right. Pump the brakes. What do you mean emergent universe? Is this possibly something that has to do with string theory?
Yes.
Oh, let's get messy. Let's get the noodles out. Let's do this.
So one popular quantum theory is string theory, as you mentioned, which envisions subatomic particles as loops of vibrating strings.
From what I understand, the spaghetti noodles that we're talking about, they're one-dimensional. Try and wrap your head around that.
I like to think of like Mobius strips, except one-dimensional Mobius strips. It's a bit of a trip.
It's really hard to kind of conceptualize, and our brains are made to see 3D things, so it's kind of difficult to understand. But as you get smaller, it's, those kind of smaller dimensions become inherent in the surroundings, but we just don't understand that scale. We're not in it.
So with string theory, it paints our four-dimensional universe as existing within a larger multi-dimensional universe, 10, sometimes 11, or even 26 dimensions. As such, reality itself is composed of an infinitesimal, innumerable amount of very tiny vibrating strings, creating a kind of basic structure or scaffold upon which the four dimensions exist.
Theoretically, this is what all particles and even energies are composed of at their fundamental level. tiny spaghetti.
Yep. So string theory exists in mathematical calculation territory. And some of the more interesting things about it is that regardless of size, string theory consistently finds corresponding calculations between systems regardless of the differences of their scope and scale. So that means from tiny dimensions to huge one.
As above, so below.
For this reason, scientists are excited about the prospect of string theory finally bridging the gap between the very big and the very small in one unified framework. A string theorist gets caught cheating on his wife and says, "Wait, I can explain everything!"
No, you won't.
So the 3 dimensions of space and the 1 dimension of time, in what we refer to collectively as space-time, has largely been understood to be the backdrop of the universe itself. However, as more and more physicists get into the weeds of it, there seems to be a growing opinion that space-time may have actually emerged from a more fundamental reality. This emergent universe is a topic of interest for a growing number of theoretical physicists in their attempts to figure out certain theories of quantum gravity. The basic idea is that space-time may not actually be fundamental, but instead is an emergent result of a fundamentally quantum phenomena.
Which, to be fair, is incredibly difficult to envision. Our entire biological system is tuned to appreciate space-time and its nuances. Trying to imagine it emerging from something outside of space-time itself is kind of difficult and a bit trippy. To envision what you're talking about, you would literally need to see outside the quote matrix.
Well, it's time to buckle up because I'm going to try and do my best to explain it.
Oh, it's gonna get crazy in here right now.
So since quantum physics and classical physics don't seem to play well together, over the last century, physicists have been searching for that missing link to a theory of everything, something that can tie it all together. This concept of an emergent universe, where space-time itself is what is emergent, it could very well provide the answers to that century-old problem. I mean, after all, even the Big Bang needs to make use of a quantum miracle just to happen.
I hate the Big Bang for that exact reason. I hate it.
So one theory of this is emergent space-time, according to string theory. This theory ties classical physics and quantum physics together over that problematic gap by focusing on 2 things. The first is from classical physics general relativity with something called anti-de Sitter space, or ADS, which specifically refers to a constant negative scalar curvature of space-time as a result of the absence of matter or energy.
To simplify, gravity is sometimes modeled as stretching the fabric of space-time, warping it and bending it. The classical example you see in high school textbooks is a bowling ball sitting on a stretched piece of fabric like a bedsheet. Usually, the example relates the bowling ball to the sun and the fabric being stretched and pulled down as the fabric of space-time itself. The more gravity an object has, the more space-time is warped and bent. The sheet is a useful model because you can roll a marble or a coin along the fabric, and the result is that it tends to move very similarly to an object being affected by gravity. If you roll an object downhill, it speeds up as it approaches the bowling ball. If you roll an object up a hill, it turns around in a parabola and starts flying towards the bowling ball. If you roll the object neither uphill nor downhill at fast enough speed, it begins to circle or orbit the bowling ball. Of course, it's easier to imagine this happening on a 2-dimensional sheet of fabric, but the idea is that this warping of space-time occurs in 3 dimensions around the sun or other massive object. We can even see this effect happening in a telescope during an eclipse, because the stars that we know are behind the sun at the time of the eclipse, we can actually see the light bending around the sun, which makes the stars appear to be positioned next to the sun because of this warping. It is this warping that anti-de Sitter space is referring to.
So if it's the sheet, it's not the flat parts of the sheet, it's the warped parts of the sheet.
It's the parts that's curved in on itself, essentially. That's the negative anti-de Sitter space. De Sitter space is when it's curved positively the other direction.
So the second aspect that's focused on in this emergent universe is a quantum theory called conformal field theory, or CFT. And this was historically used for statistical mechanics, but it became a very important factor in string theory.
To explain it as simply as possible, the little tiny micro objects in the quantum world are like shapes drawn on a piece of fabric. Conformal field theory is basically observing how these tiny shapes act differently as the fabric they're drawn upon is warped, stretched, and deformed. In some ways, it's similar to the idea of anti-de Sitter space, but on a much smaller scale for vastly different types of objects, and it's not using gravity. There's no gravity. So for reasons Hecka's about to explain, these two ideas go well together, like peanut butter and jelly, or chocolate.
So conformal field theory, or CFT, it's a quantum field theory that is scale invariant, meaning that the angles and shapes of particles and forces are unchanged and have symmetrical integrity regardless of whether they're scaled up or down. Typically, it deals with Planck length, which we'll touch on later, but due to CFT's scalability, it's almost like if you were to take a Planck length into Photoshop and make it into a vector image, the symmetries of CFT are conformal no matter what changes of size are made to the system. So you can blow it up, shrink it down, it's the same.
Without getting distorted, or what we say in imagery, it looks blown up.
It's not lossy. It doesn't lose information.
Exactly. It stays the same.
What's an astronomical unit? One hell of a big apartment.
So when
I
you
don't get it. Sorry.
An astronomical unit?
But you can call a lot of things a unit.
You can, including an apartment.
It's a pretty bad one.
I'm gonna pretend that you're talking about a different kind of unit that makes me laugh.
I mean, well, it does have to do with the joke a little bit, because while we're using all this stretching of fabric to like talk about gravity, the small scales don't really have gravity, but they do have stretchy fabric. And what Heck is saying is that while physicists and quantum mechanics can't agree on gravity, they can agree on stretchy fabric and scale each other's models up into the same size and like come up with some pretty interesting math. Hecka will explain.
Right. So it's cool because anti-de Sitter space belongs to classical physics and conformal field theory belongs to quantum physics. When taken together, anti-de Sitter space and conformal field theory create what is called the ADS-CFT correspondence. And this is an interesting thing simply for the fact that ADS has all of Einstein's general relativity theory of gravity, and CFT has no gravity whatsoever. They're very, very different. But when you take them together, the ADS-CFT correspondence can be described as being a holographic duality, where the interplay between the theories acts in a similar fashion to the relationship between a three-dimensional object and its image as a hologram. What's really cool about this is that the same math can be applied to both theories in an identical manner, building a mathematical bridge between the physical entirety of the universe and quantum theory that can still embrace gravity.
Einstein developed a theory about space, and it was about time, too.
Okay, there we go.
So now this whole thing about ADS-CFT correspondence being a kind of holographic duality, it has to do with the strange fact that ADS actually has one more dimension in it than CFT does. So you would think that this would be a dissuading factor for physicists looking to solve that age-old problem, but it's actually something that has made it even more appealing to them. And that's because a few years prior to the discovery of this correspondence, two physicists, that's Leonard Susskind and Gerard Hoof from Stanford University and Utrecht University, respectively, they discovered another correspondence known as the holographic principle.
Woo!
I like that this dude's from Stanford.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Leonard Susskind fan, and he did a lot of like groundbreaking work, and this kind of blew my mind when I learned about the holographic principle.
So the holographic principle has to do with a two-dimensional flat surface, which would hold all the information of its three-dimensional interior, much like a hologram. The basic idea is that the properties of a regional space are encoded by its boundary. And this is a concept which is being directly applied to black holes, but also to the entropy of ordinary mass.
Flat Earth is only half the truth. Turns out reality itself is flat.
Yeah, this was interesting because Susskind actually worked a lot expanding Stephen Hawking's theories about black holes. Hawking obviously discovered Hawking radiation, which is how black holes kind of dissolve over time. But what they also discovered is you can encode anything the black hole sucks in, matter-wise or energy-wise, is encoded on the surface of the event horizon of the black hole. So as it grows, the information may actually be retained in a two-dimensional wrapping sphere around the edge of the boundary.
Which is wicked cool.
Yeah, it's really awesome. It doesn't destroy information. It may encode it in a different, like in a holographic state.
So this conceptual overlap is what made the physicists pretty stoked for the ADS-CFT correspondence, because in a similar fashion, CFT's 4 dimensions encode ADS's 5 dimensions. And if this is the case, then it implies that space-time indeed emerges from a fundamental quantum phenomenon. To do this, the source from which the space of EDS emerges from is none other than quantum entanglement. So to recap, this is because when any 2 objects interact, they become entangled and will remain entangled if left uninhibited, regardless of distance. If distance, a measure of space, is emergent, then entanglement is actually the reason there's distance in the first place. Is this breaking your brain yet? Because it should be.
Yes, to perhaps oversimplify, the stage upon which everything seems to be happening is supported by a framework of quantum entanglement behind the scenes.
So, according to Susskind,
the continuity of the connectivity of space owes its existence to quantum mechanical entanglement. Wow.
So it's the entanglement between 2 regions of space which holds them together and prevents them from falling apart. On the ADS side, 2 regions of space correspond to the CFT side as 2 highly entangled clusters. With this in mind, quantum entanglement then serves as a kind of foundation upon which space-time emerges. By disentangling, you would effectively be disemerging the entangled space affected by that entanglement. So in other words, the emergent space and what is of that space would simply fall apart.
To be honest, this is a bit new and confusing to me, but I think I can understand just enough to illustrate why it's interesting and how it can relate to some things we do understand. For instance, imagine we're talking about video games. In this case, space-time would be like the game map or the setting where the game happens. If this were GTA, you'd have mountains, skyscrapers, rivers, lakes, and the inside of various buildings. If it were Bloodborne, you'd have city streets, chapels, etc. That's like space-time to us. It's the setting upon which everything is happening in the game. You may need special jumping boots to reach a hidden key, which would allow you to open a door, etc., etc. That's all the limitations you face in space-time. Things in the game, much like real life, are separated by distance, time, and the verbs that player characters are able to act out. But is that the base level of reality for video games? No! All of the stuff inside the video game is really just a bunch of ones and zeros encoded onto a flat surface somewhere on a CD, a game cartridge, or hard drive. In this example, the encoded data inside the hard drive, that's like the entangled quantum dimension, at least as far as I can tell.
So at this point, we should probably pause a bit and point out that this is just a collection of theories that appear to be very optimistic, but there are still many problems, since if it did hold all the answers, it would no longer be considered just theory. However, while string theory isn't the only theory to suggest that space-time may be emergent, or theories that utilize string theory still does hold enough weight as a kind of toolkit for many other areas of physics, even though it's largely uncharted mathematical territory. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is the closest thing, to me at least, that clicks with what we're talking about with this gateway process, or what is it called? Gateway experience?
Mm-hmm. Process, experience.
And just ties in really well to the kind of OBEs that we've been talking about.
Right. And, you know, a video game exists classically on a cartridge or a disc of sorts, right? And it's like a laser reader. That's like a flat plane, but then inside your TV screen, there's like a whole world where you're like running around inside, and like you have perception and there's speed and all these laws and rules and stuff. We understand our reality kind of in the same way. We're in the game. Our environment is pretty similar.
We would be able to learn more about the code behind the game if we were able to cause like these gnarly glitches. You know what I mean? And if we got really good, we could like hack the code and like instantaneously make things appear or disappear and teleport over here and over there. That's like the hope of all this. Like,
and that's what I would mean, like, you know, regards to the McDonald's statement on this gateway document. That's what I would mean. Like, we're breaking the training wheels off with these abilities, right? We're getting the developers toolkit. We're getting the what is it called? The console commands. We're opening up the developers options to change the weight of a object in the game, and so you can, when you punch it, it goes flying farther than it normally would, right?
Like a quantum neurobiological hack.
Exactly. And McDonald is trying to get to the root of the topic here, and he just keeps on running into like, well, I have to explain this and I have to explain that. And he says, in order to know how consciousness functions, before we can talk about how to break the training wheels off and access all the other dimensions and whatnot, we got to kind of talk about the code and the world and how does that work. And that's kind of what we've been talking about this whole episode, is that it's all these like wave functions that exist in this, malleable world, and it's all like math. And to be honest, he kind of flip-flops in his document, like trying to get to the points about consciousness and the points about how to explain the hologram, the video game world we live in, and how to break the rules. How would we even do that in the first place? When we're talking about our brain, we assume that our brain is like the primary organ for our consciousness, though that may not be true. It has a lot to do, it seems, with our sensory experience. And our senses and the brain is tasked with primarily deducing the meaning of the external stimuli, our world that we experience, that our environment. Our brain takes that in and then it says it's a rock, it's a trail between the trees. You can go that way. That's our brain's job primarily.
And it basically does this by comparing incoming information to itself, to the collection of information it already has. We kind of function through a series of constant comparisons to do that.
Exactly. That is classically what being conscious means. Like I said, we can think of reality like a code that our consciousness can learn. And with enough codes, we can change our environment. To put it simply, one has to know a few things to make use of a conscious mind. This reality that our consciousness exists in would thus be like the fuel that fills our brain up with information and gives it work to do and to do its primary function. We kind of have to explain that hologram before we can talk about the consciousness then, about what our senses are picking up. What's the message? As McDonald put it, this in the document, he says, this is the raw stuff. This is where the fun begins, he says.
So to really know ourselves or consciousness, we need an incoming external stream of information to compare to. We learn more about ourselves, and in doing so, we learn more about the external universe as well. If you relate it to the holographic principle, it would kind of imply that the information also goes both ways.
I can't help but say the words of the ancients, know thyself, and you shall know the universe.
Or in this case, know the universe, and you shall know yourself.
Pretty much, yes. But we're going to do it in reverse today.
It's as if the two are inextricably linked. As we've mentioned before, the hermetic axiom, as above, so below. As without, so within. Somebody get me a game genie.
That's the idea.
I think it's cool because string theory tells you that if you try to shrink a dimension, you end up with a new world where that dimension is huge and the math is still the same. It tells you that the math remains the same regardless of whether you shrink it real tiny or blow it up real big. And I think that's highly applicable as a concept to apply to consciousness and its internal, external manifestations.
Yeah, the holographic principle, even as applied to the wider universe in and of itself, or even there's brain theories now that talk about how consciousness manifests in our own brains. And it really is the as above, so below, because you can cut a hologram into smaller parts, but it still contains the whole within it. So you can go on a small scale or a large scale, but you're going to still see that same pattern within the hologram.
Woo!
But if you'd like to see the rest of this hologram, along with its lasers and its 3D projection, please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you this extended episode, but all of our extended episodes going back to before the before times, and you'll instantaneously be given the secret keys to our Discord server, where you can talk physics and biological psychobabble at us anytime, day or night, and we will tell you how wrong you are. Thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Pew, pew, pew.
Pew, 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 pew.